Alright fellas, the highly anticipated rematch between Sebastian Fundora and Tszyu finally went down, and it was a rough night for Team Tszyu, who came into this fight looking to redeem themselves after a controversial and inconclusive first bout that left fans with more questions than answers. But instead of redemption, what unfolded was a clear and painful unraveling of Tszyu's form, strategy, and confidence as Fundora this time with a full camp and a proper game plan came in sharper, more composed, and far more dangerous than the version that stepped in on short notice the first time. Well, Tszyu, sadly, looked nothing like the warrior we saw in past performances. Coming out stiff, flat-footed, hesitant, and without the explosiveness that once defined his rise in the sport, resembling more the man who was stunned by Murtazaliev than the guy who had dreams of unifying the division, and after being dropped early in the fight and showing no clear adjustments or backup plan, Tszyu continued to march forward courageously but ineffectively, taking heavy shots, rarely fainting, and appearing like a fighter who was searching for a miracle punch more than executing any real strategy, while Fundora grew increasingly confident as the rounds progressed, happy to take Tszyu's power in exchange for punishing him on the inside, and by the end of round 7, it was clear Tszyu had emptied his tank and was physically and mentally done, making the difficult but smart decision to retire on the stool, a move that should earn him respect rather than criticism because it showed awareness, courage, and self-preservation after absorbing brutal punishment in a fight that was only going one way, and although quitting on the stool often sparks harsh judgment in boxing circles, this wasn't cowardice, it was a fighter acknowledging reality and choosing to fight another day, and full credit must go to Fundora, a once-hyped talent who was almost forgotten after his shock defeat to Brian Mendoza, but who has now firmly re-established himself as a true champion at 154, displaying maturity, control, and adaptability, making himself a serious player in a division that is stacked with talent, while Tszyu, who took this fight with guts and gave everything he had, now finds himself at a real career crossroads with questions swirling about his future at 150 for where his physicality seems to be fading and the weight cuts are clearly draining him, and for him, the most logical next step would be to move up to middleweight and finally settle the long-running unfinished business with fellow Aussie Michael Zerafu in what would be a massive domestic clash with genuine stadium potential, a fight that was once scheduled but fell apart due to last-minute drama, and now seems more relevant than ever, offering Tszyu a chance to rebuild, regain confidence, and perhaps even position himself for a title shot against the aging Arislandi Lara who holds the WBA belt and would likely be open to a big-money PBC clash. But as much as that's the smart move, there's always the risk that Tszyu's handlers go back to their old playbook, bringing in soft opposition from nowhere just to get him a win, or worse, pushing him into an ill-advised fight against someone like Keith Thurman, a matchup that stylistically does him no favors and could send his career spiraling even further, while for Fundora, who now holds real momentum and credibility, the next challenge is about navigating the frustrating politics of the PBC landscape, where securing big fights is easier said than done, and although logical unifications with the likes of Murtazaliev or even a blockbuster showdown with Virgil Ortiz Jr. make sense, the reality is we might see him get stuck in a cycle of failed negotiations and end up facing a less exciting opponent like Terrell Gausha just to stay active. But even if that happens, this win over Tszyu has given Fundora back his place among the elite and reintroduced him as a legitimate threat to anyone in the division. And although the fight itself didn't end in a dramatic finish, it was still a telling, gritty affair that gave us insight into where both men stand. Fundora rising, Tszyu reeling, and as an Aussie who's been openly critical of Tszyu's team more than the fighter himself, I can say that while his effort was admirable, his preparation and promotional direction leave a lot to be desired. And the media backlash he's received, particularly from outlets like The Australian with their tasteless Quitsville headline, only proves how disconnected mainstream coverage still is when it comes to the brutal realities of this sport, with clumsy references to Rocky and cricket doing nothing but trivializing the very real risks these men take every time they step in the ring. So instead of mocking a fighter who put his body on the line and recognized the limits of what he could endure, we should be asking the right questions about how he was prepared, what the plan really was, and where his team intends to go next, because the story of Tszyu is not over, but it's at a dangerous tipping point, while Fundora's chapter has just been reopened with all eyes on what comes next. So now I turn it over to you guys. What did you think of the fight, the stoppage, and the future of both fighters? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like if you appreciated the breakdown, and subscribe to Glove Zone Boxing to stay in the loop on all the action, analysis, and aftermath from the wild world of the sweet science.